Welcome to week 5 of our course on nonfiction writing. Our next writing exercise is to incorporate the use of a scene or one or more scenes to tell the story. And this is a very powerful way of telling it. Let's talk about the process of this. It's based on observations, close listening, or face-to-face interviews. And the idea is to capture an actual scene which incorporates people talking to each other. Something is happening and there's some sort of conversation going on. And by capturing this, we'll get a sense of what is happening and be able to communicate that in our work. The method for doing this is very simple. Describe what you saw and heard so a reader can discern what it means. You're not going to be able to capture everything on the page because it would take too much time. So you're going to have to edit it. Edit what you observed, describe the key aspects of what you saw and heard in just enough detail so that the reader can understand what was happening. So that means listening and looking and probably taking notes. You want to describe what the scene looks like, where it is, what kind of a setting it is, who the people are involved, what they look like, how they are acting. This is all part of the storytelling parts of conveying a scene. The reason you want to do this is that scenes can bring your stories to life. The writer-observer is essentially a fly on the wall. The concept is there's a fly on the wall who sees everything that's going on and then can tell that to the reader. So you're watching something happening, capturing the moment, and then putting it on the page. So why do we do this? The reason is to convey meaning. Instead of saying something happened and summarizing it, we're going to show it happen. The meaning of what occurs is implicit in what occurs in the described scene. It's captured and conveyed by using the pertinent details from the scene, key spoken words, the setting, how people look and act, and the manner in which the action proceeds. The readers read what happened and then they draw their own conclusions on what it means without explicit summaries or explanations. So again, this is like real life. You walk into a situation, you observe it, you hear what's happening, and then you make sense out of it. And that's what you're going to try to do on the page to tell your story. So what's important in this? Well, of course, accuracy is critical. To make this work, you have to capture actually what happened and actually what is said. And the process is, on the page, it's verisimilitude. It's recreating as fairly and accurately as possible what actually happened in the scene. This is why quotes must be exact and context needs to be precise. And then what you write will truly reflect the truth of what was going on. Well, you've seen this before. It's like going to a movie. The way movies work basically is you see actions, you hear things happening, you hear the dialogue, and then you make sense out of it that way. And you're going to try to do the same thing on the page. And this is kind of the key to narrative nonfiction. To help you out to understand what this looks like, so it doesn't sound so mysterious, we've got a reading example. And it comes from Tracy Kidder. It's a chapter from his book, Old Friends. It's a story of several people at a rest home in Massachusetts. So Tracy Kidder is one of the writers that you should care about if you're interested in narrative nonfiction. He won a Pulitzer Prize for a book he wrote back in 1982 called The Soul of a New Machine. It was a wonderful title for a book about the making of a computer at Wang Laboratories in Massachusetts. As Kidder puts it about this kind of writing, the job of a person trying to write stories that are true is to make what's true believable. You have to bring people to life and scenes to life. So I'll say it again. You're going to be capturing events, listening to dialogue, looking at what the setting is like, and writing it in your story. And your challenge is to write it as accurately as possible. Can you do it 100%? Probably not. But this is a goal. The goal is to try to fairly represent what is happening with quotes and descriptions, and then allow the reader to be the one to make up his or her mind about what it all means. Someone else who will help you about how to do this is Tom Wolfe. We read this piece at the beginning of the term, and we're going to read it again just to see how it applies now. His piece called The Features Game was the foreword from his book called New Journalism in 1972. And this book documented the adoption of narrative nonfiction techniques by mainstream journalism in the 1950s through the 1970s. So Tom Wolfe, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, is a very famous writer, and I'm sure you've heard of him before. He lived from 1930 to 2018. His best, I think, nonfiction narrative book is The Right Stuff, and it's about men preparing for space flight. A good movie has been made of it, and the book is excellent. In his use of the novelistic techniques of nonfiction, Mr. Wolfe, beginning in the 1960s, helped create the enormously influential hybrid known as the New Journalism. That was a comment from a New York Times obituary for Tom Wolfe when he died. So what are the key aspects of Tom Wolfe's approach to narrative nonfiction journalism? And these are the things that we're going to be using. The first one is the scene-by-scene construction idea, and that's what we're doing here. In this exercise, it's finding a scene, telling a story by moving from scene to scene, and resorting as little as possible to sheer historical narrative, what is sometimes called exposition. The other thing that he is very interested in is dialogue. Realistic dialogue involves the reader more completely than any other single device. I think we've seen that already from the pieces that you did based on your interviews. When people start to speak, they come to life. Their personality comes out, their values are more obvious, the language they use tells us something. So we need to capture that and put it on the page. Another key aspect is the third person point of view. The ability to say what someone is thinking. How do you do that? You ask them. When something happens, afterwards you go to them and say, what were you thinking when this happened? You can do it historically, obviously. Somebody who's involved in a big event, they can tell you what they were thinking, or you can do it at the time you're involved in it, right after it happens. There's a council meeting, you're attending it, you're recording it, and later you want to know, what were you thinking when the mayor got up and said that's a dumb idea? And by capturing that, we can include that in the story if we want to. And finally, another idea he has is something called status life, which is a fancy way of talking about telling details. Reporting the entire pattern of possessions and behavior through which people express their position in the world, or what they think it is, or what they hope it is. In other words, looking for details that tell us about the person, or the incident, or the place, or the time of the story we are telling. If we're in downtown Ashland, people are dressed a certain way. If we're in Miami Beach on a Sunday afternoon, people are dressed another way. And those little descriptions and details about how people are dressed, or what they look like, can give us some more insight into what it means. In other words, finding all those little details that describe who a person is, what era they're from, what their values are. These are great details that really make your story come to life. So see if you can capture a scene somewhere. It could be a conversation you overhear. It could be a conversation you're having, if you want to include yourself in it. It could be an event occurring somewhere. As I mentioned, it could be a city council meeting or something like that. It could be a classroom exercise. What are people saying in the class to each other? By capturing the essence of that, we can tell what was going on and convey a story to our readers. So that's our exercise. Exercise number 3 coming up, the scene. And I look forward to seeing what you come up with.